right through to lunch. I'd like you to just help yourself to refreshments. We've got at the back, we've got Tim Askew. He's our Director of Programs, and we've got Bonnie, who's our events guru. And we may have Janine join us in a bit. From New South Wales Government, we have Alberto and Siddharth, and they are going to introduce the partners they've engaged at ARUP.
Thank you. My name is Alberto, and yes, throughout this process, we engaged ARUP as our technical partner, the technical delivery partner. We work with Lauren Howe and Phil Bampiani. They're based in Melbourne, so they will be presenting online today.
Thank you very much. And finally, we have Monique from Landcom, and she will be doing the industry burst. She will be online as well. So she's going to talk us through some real life case study. So a rough agenda for the day. I'll briefly be introducing the JO and our part in this work, and then Alberto will talk more about his programme. And then we will switch to online presentation to talk about low carbon concrete. They've been doing some work prior to this event to establish what is actually available in the Hunter region. So we'll go through that. Then we'll have our first breakout, which is why you're on coloured tables. And then we will do a quick industry burst with Monique, followed by the second breakout, and then just next steps, call for action. So it's going to be pretty jam-packed, and we'll keep an eye on time. So we're all here. You will have seen this if you read the invite, to understand the availability of low carbon concrete in the Hunter, as well as identify the opportunities and the barriers. So why isn't the uptake of this happening a bit more than what maybe perhaps we think it should be? And just to emphasize that we are here to just discuss this. It's not a decision-making forum. We just want to start the conversation. I've just gone back, beg your pardon. So the Hunter Joint Organisation, what are they? I always get asked that when I tell people where I work, and they think I work for like a, I don't know, a joint specialist, physiotherapy or something, but we are a local intergovernmental body. So we identify key strategic priorities that make sense to work on a regional basis rather than a local basis. And we sort of advocate for these priorities. So this specific event is part of our circular procurement for local government procurement project. And it aligns with a lot of our strategic themes and key opportunities identified by our mayors in the region. It's become obvious to us in my discussions with councils and previous discussions with councils that councils really want to support local suppliers. That's a real wish from their point of view. And I think we have got a potential by working together as a region to accelerate sustainability and net zero goals for everyone. And that leads me nicely into Chris's slides, who's going to talk a little bit more about why that matters. Chris?
Thanks, Susan. G'day, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. Look, aside from the obvious, I thought it was important to talk about some of the recent regulatory and policy changes that have occurred that impact both the private sector and the government sector in terms of their emissions liability and their reporting requirements. So I think most of you will probably be aware, and particularly our corporate friends in the room will probably be aware that there's been some recent amendments to the Corporations and the ASIC Act that require entities now to produce annual sustainability reports that include mandatory climate disclosure. So that's commencing from this financial year. So reports will have to be submitted as they normally would, as following this financial year, but they will now need to include an annual sustainability report that declares climate statements, including your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in the first year. And then from the second reporting year for each entity, it will include scope 3 emissions. the reporting standards that guide these disclosures have been released to by the AASB. So you can see the two referred to there. So they provide some guidance about what they need to include. But importantly, that means now it's mandatory for entities, for private entities of a certain size, to produce these reports and report on their emissions, including their Scope 3 emissions from year 2. So anyone that's purchasing concrete as part of their supply chain will now have to report on the emissions that are embedded or embodied in that concrete. I'll just flick through to the next slide too. So just for everyone's benefit, you can see here, this is who must complete a sustainability report. So you can see the implementation of this is staged over 3 years. So the first reporting period will begin on the first reports will be required after 1st of January this year for the largest of entities. Now for council staff in the room, there has been some questions about whether this includes you. Obviously these these two acts only apply to the corporate sector, so they do not apply to councils, if any council staff in the room. However, I think a clear policy signal exists in this New South Wales government reporting requirement that has subsequently been released. So the state government's basically following the mandatory climate-related financial disclosures policy that's being applied to the corporate sector by making amendments to the Government Sector Finance Act as well. So a number of public entities, New South Wales government entities like state government departments, universities, will now need to produce annual reports that include their mandatory climate-related financial disclosures as well. Importantly, this doesn't include councils. So councils are off the hook at the moment, but I think this is a really clear policy signal to local government too, that this will be coming down the line eventually, and that'll probably come through amendments to the Local Government Act at some point. Now, obviously, I'm speculating, but I think that this is a pretty clear policy signal from the federal and state government that this is where we're heading. So I think it's increasingly important that we understand and quantify the emissions in our supply chains, because while this will only include Scope 1 and 2 emissions from the outset, I think Scope 3 emissions will follow. And if you look at the guidance, the Treasury policy statements that relate to this, they have referred to Scope 3 emissions and just said that there's a temporarily they're not including Scope 3 emissions because they need to build capacity in that area. So I guess to summarise, I think it's increasingly important that we understand this and start to take a little bit of action on the emissions that exist in our supply chains. I'll pass it back over to you, Susan, I think, or Alberto.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Alberto Jimenez, and I work with the New South Wales government within the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water with my colleagues Siddharth Pradhan and Rupan Air. So why are we here today? I'm pretty sure that I can anticipate a lot of you know that you have low carbon concrete products available, but the big question is, where is the demand? No one seems to be asking for it, and I understand that. So I just wanted to talk about some of the policy background driving this upcoming demand or interest for low carbon concrete. And I want you to think of it this way. So for state government and a lot of the councils, there's been a lot of work in this net zero transition, and they probably have started with their operational emissions. So renewable energy, efficiency, and waste management. And I think that's just now in a place where those initiatives have matured and they're only just starting to think about the next thing, which is Scope 3 emissions. So there is this emerging push and interest in managing and reducing their Scope 3 emissions. And a lot of them see the use of low carbon concrete product as the kind of the low hanging fruit. An easy way for them to reduce their Scope 3 emissions. So yes, there is no commitment, but you're starting to see a lot of these policies emerging. So for example, for the New South Wales government, for their infrastructure agencies, they've just released a decarbonizing infrastructure and delivery policy, which encourages the use of low carbon building materials, concrete, aluminium, and steel. And it is a similar story for councils. So even though there is no commitment yet, you're starting to see these mandates and policies that want to manage their Scope 3 emissions. Even though if it's not a commitment, there's a lot of interest in this space. In addition to this, we also know that fly ash, it's a finite resource here in New South Wales. So a lot of the questions we get asked is why are we driving industry to use low carbon concrete product which uses fly ash, and even though it is a finite resource? And the answer is there is a lot of fly ash in New South Wales, and the EPA has a mandate to reuse this fly ash. So they need to drive down Scope 3 emissions, to manage fly ash, and to increase the use of recycled content. It's all kind of merging into this solution, which is low carbon concrete, and the development specifications. So if there's something I want you to take from this slide is that, yes, the commitments from the New South Wales governments and councils might not be there, and the demand might not be there yet, but you can see the policy starting to emerge and the interest, and I want you to see this as a signal for upcoming demand of low carbon concrete. So while that was the policy background, the New South Wales government has a couple of enabling programs. So you might be aware of MECLA, the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance, NAVERS, and my own program, the Low Emissions Building Materials Program. It's kind of provide this type of forums and opportunities to network and address these challenges. So really recommend you, if you're not part of MECLA, to join the conversation. And then there is a series of available support for industry, so either funds or grants aimed at high emitting industries with the aim of help you create and develop low carbon products, but also decarbonize your own operations. Now, talking about my own program, my program is here to make it easier for consumers, so that is New South Wales government agencies and councils, to make more sustainable choices. In this case, procure low carbon concrete. Some of those initiatives within that project, the first one was developing requirements for low carbon concrete. Last year, we partnered with a couple of New South Wales government agencies, Water New South Wales, Health Infrastructure, and Landcom, and we developed this requirement. So we essentially went out to industry and we just wanted to know what products are available in the market. And based on that, we wanted to nominate some targets, give them to agencies and council and say, it's okay if you ask low carbon concrete products that have a 50% SEM replacement level. We know that there are some products available in the market with the big asterisk that availability might be subject to engagement with your local supply chain, because we know that some of these products are available in metro area, but they might not be available in regional area. That's some of the work that we're trying to incentivize. The big caveat is as subject to conversations with your local supply chain. After we developed the specifications, we wanted to support agencies and councils across New South Wales implement the specifications. So there's about 128 councils in New South Wales. We couldn't engage all of them, but we did start with 10 councils. And lucky for us, 3 of those councils that we engage are here in the Hunter region. So the Mid Coast Council, Newcastle Council, and Lake Macquarie. They participated in this project. So we essentially brought the specifications to them and got everyone in one room in a series of workshops, trained them, and provided guidance. There were some councils that, even though they had they had already implemented low carbon concrete products in one of their projects, they often didn't even know that that was the case. It might be that that project was led by a green champion within that organization, and they knew about the implementation of low carbon concrete product. But once you get the procurement teams and the sustainability teams together, they don't know that these products are available because it hasn't been embedded into kind of a more long-term consolidated strategy. So it's still in that kind of, you might have worked with someone, but their own organization doesn't know that there's available products. Having said that, we see an emerging interest in implementation of low carbon concrete. And a lot of this work, it's available to other councils that would like to be trained in this space. So now, call to action. Through our engagement with these councils, with these 10 councils, the first question was, the suppliers, they're not seeing the demand for low carbon concrete. So I think one of the objectives of today is we wanted to get the councils together so they can start signaling upcoming demand. And we also want them to hear that there is local availability of low carbon concrete. Because as I said, some of their team might be aware, but in general, as a councils, they're not really aware. And I think I would encourage everyone here to follow in today, to reach out to these councils and explain your products, what's available in the market. Lastly, I'd like you to talk with those councils and talk to us about any challenges. So we know that it might be that maybe the smaller suppliers of low carbon concrete don't have access to fly ash. That's the type of issues that we want to be aware of, and we want you to tell us, because connecting it back to those funds and grants, that's something that we could potentially, the New South Wales government could potentially help with, but we just need to understand, and that we know that this is an emerging conversation, it's new. We really just want to know. So encourage you to have those conversations and let us know about issues and challenges.
Thank you, Alberto. That's awesome. So we're going to move on to the online presenters now. So I will just see if this still works.
Can you hear me all good?
Switch over to Lauren. Can we hear Lauren online, everyone? Yes, I can hear you coming through, Lauren.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. So
see me now. I don't think you want this.
What I'm about to talk us through, sorry to the councils that have already gone through the training sessions with us. You would have seen some of these slides before, but we just want to get everyone on the same page for moving forward in this workshop today of what actually is low carbon concrete. So if we step back to the most fundamental level of what actually is concrete, concrete is a mixture of different constituent materials. So this includes cement, aggregate, sand, different admixtures, and water. And so we make cement by heating it with clay and limestone, or heating clay and limestone at very high temperatures of up to 1450 degrees, and then we grind it together to make a clinker. And this clinker is then mixed with a small percentage of gypsum to create your Portland cement. We add the gypsum to the clinker to slow down the reaction of that clinker with water, otherwise it would react too quickly. And so today we are talking about the carbon impact of concrete. So just wanted to say what is embodied carbon. So it is the greenhouse gas emissions associated with the materials and construction processes through a whole life cycle of a building or an infrastructure, so a bridge or even a pavement. And so this includes all of the emissions associated with everything from the extraction of the raw materials and the manufacturing through to transportation, construction on site, and then end of life. And so what is the impact of concrete, and why do we choose as part of the low emission specification program to focus on concrete? A number of reasons for this. Concrete contributes a huge percentage of the global CO2 emissions for one material, so it's about 7% globally. But it is a material that is a bit of a low-hanging fruit in terms of, as designers and specifiers and all the stakeholders working across the value chain of concrete, we have a huge opportunity to reduce the impact. So this graph at the bottom, or pie chart, just shows the breakdown of concrete by mass. So around 16% of a typical mix is your cement. But then when we look at it from a embodied carbon footprint perspective, over 90% of the carbon of that concrete is from the cement. And the good thing here is we have a big opportunity to actually start to reduce the impact of, or the amount of cement that we use in our mixes. And so how can we reduce the impact of our concrete? So like working back through the process diagram of how we produce concrete, the first thing that a manufacturer can do is starting to look at how they reduce the impact of manufacturing that clinker. And so that's they might do things like use alternative fuels to reduce the impact there. And then as we start to work through the process, you can reduce the amount of clinker that actually goes into the cement. So you might have heard of things like GL cement, where you're using higher percentages of limestone. Then the way that, which is the focus of the event today and what most people know in terms of how we reduce the carbon impact of concrete, is to substitute some of the cement that's going into your mix with other materials. We call them supplementary cementitious materials, SCMs. Examples of these are fly ash, as Alberto alluded to earlier, and also which is byproduct of the coal industry, and then blast furnace slag, which comes from the steel making process. Other ways we can reduce the impact might not be carbon related, but still reducing the amount of virgin material use is in replacing fine aggregate and coarse aggregates. You might replace your fine aggregate with manufactured sand and your coarse aggregate with recycled concrete aggregate. Overall, there's also opportunities that manufacturers are looking into in terms of carbon capture and storage. And then obviously this is all just for the concrete mix. Once we move down to we're using concrete on the project, there's lots of things we need to be considering in terms of efficient design and actually reducing the amount of structures that are concrete. And so, yeah, you'll often hear or people saying low carbon concrete. Firstly, there's not really a globally or even probably nationally accepted definition, but generally when people are talking about low carbon concrete, they are referring to concrete that has been produced with a reduction in the cementitious content or cement content. So they've replaced the cement with supplementary cementitious materials. But as explained before, there are other ways that a manufacturer will be working to reduce the impact of their processing and find efficiencies to bring down the impact of their mix. I think there's something in terms of the Hunter region. We know that typically higher levels of fly ash are being used than in other regions across New South Wales. And so there needs to be consideration of the definition of low carbon for the Hunter region is higher than what might be for other regions in New South Wales. Just because you'll find that a lot of the suppliers are doing a certain level as business as usual already because they have the supply of it nearby. So then what are the benefits of adopting low carbon concrete on your projects? The main benefit and why we are all here today, hopefully, is the opportunity to actually make real impact and reductions in terms of our environmental impacts, so our embodied carbon and also use of virgin materials on capital and maintenance works for councils. In terms of durability, so the use of fly ash and slag in a concrete mix will reduce the permeability of the concrete, and therefore it helps to improve the durability when the concrete is exposed to aggressive environments. For example, if you have high levels of sulfates or chlorides, so if you're in a maritime environment, as an example, And the mixes have been, when you speak to the suppliers, they will all be developing their mixes to meet the same properties as what you have specified if you were to use your ordinary Portland cement or traditional mix, and therefore there is no impact to maintenance and therefore no impact on long-term costs. There are, of course, challenges, which is why this is not something that's just being done straight away for everyone everywhere. We're aware of a lot of these challenges and barriers, and through the work Arup's been doing, working with lots of councils, we've been collating all these to try and understand what are actual barriers and what are perceived barriers, and so doing a lot of myth busting. And so I think one of the main things we need to consider is, well, we're trying to build up understanding across the industry. There definitely are barriers that need to be considered, but some of them are not necessarily to do with the fact that you've specified low carbon concrete. It might be to do with other things. So one of the things to consider is around workability and experience of the contractor using low carbon concrete on site. So concrete that has high levels of cement replacement will behave differently on site, and therefore the contractor does need to understand that there might be differences in consistency of the concrete and finishing, and also setting time. Speaking to suppliers, and Sachi will talk more about this in a second, we obviously get different information from different suppliers, and it's very important to discuss with the supplier of your particular application and your performance requirements, what you need, as a lot of the time it can be cost neutral, but they're also, if you are going for higher levels of cement replacement, there is likely to be an increase in cost. And Sachi's got some general rules, but obviously we really encourage you to speak to the concrete suppliers who can talk you through this for your particular application. In terms of specifications, basically what we find in the industry is if it's not specified, it's just not done. And so it might not be so much that the specs itself are the barrier, because the Australian standards and so on allow for these materials to be used. It just might be that you don't actually have a requirement that is encouraging it to be used. And so we have, as part of the program, developed specification requirements and clauses that you can bring into your documentation to enable contractors to go to suppliers and tender for those different concrete mixes. In terms of early age strength, using cement replacement does increase the curing time that is required to reach your 28-day strength. And so a number of years ago, 5-10 years ago, this was the reason why low carbon concrete generally wasn't being used, but there have been a lot of advances in technologies around use of different admixtures that then allow for the same high early age strength to be met if that is something that is needed for your project. What we've found often is that actually the project doesn't need a high early age strength, but if it does, then there are mixes that the suppliers can provide that will achieve that same those same strength requirements at the early age. And then finally, we put supply limitations here for the Hunter region. I would say this is not an issue, and this is something that Sachi is going to talk through now of what we've found out from your region. We've got many suppliers in the room and online that will be talking about this during the breakout sessions as well.
Thanks, Lauren. So I'm Sachi. I'm also from Arup side. So as Lauren mentioned, often we hear supply capabilities as a barrier or a challenge when it comes to use low carbon concrete. From what we are aware of, there are 18 suppliers in Hunter region, and throughout this project, we have engaged with 15 suppliers to get to know their supply capabilities in terms of low carbon concrete. So we asked them a couple of questions like whether they provide low carbon concrete, and if they do, what are the replacement percentages that they use, and what types of SCMs, etc. So I'll go into the details at a later slide. So this map we developed to map out the concrete plants in Hunter region. So each dot represents an approximate location of a concrete plant, not a specific supplies. For example, one supply can have 3 plants, 3 small dots across, scattered around Hunter region. So I should say that this is based on our engagement with suppliers, and also we did a Google search to find out concrete plant locations. So there could be more plants, and this is just an estimate. So for most of the councils, we have a minimum of 2 plants within the region or within their boundaries or within a 30-minute drive. Yep. So moving on to the questions, from these 15 suppliers, we have engaged to get low carbon concrete. We focused on getting information on fly ash and slag, or GGBS, which refers to ground granulated blast furnace slag. So most of the feedback we got was positive. They do have low carbon concrete in the Hunter region, and we have received 2 feedbacks from 2 smaller suppliers saying that they don't provide low carbon concrete. Also, we got to know from most of the suppliers, they already include a percentage of fly ash in their mixes as business as usual, like Lauren mentioned earlier. So in that case, they don't specifically name these mixes as low carbon concrete, but they do have a percentage replacement of fly ash in their mixes already. And in terms of replacement percentage, I want to highlight the word replacement, that we ask for a cement replacement. So it means these mixes have to replace some cement content with SCMs. So it is not simply adding SCMs on top of the cement content that you already have in the mix, because if you do that, it won't be low carbon concrete. It will have a higher embodied carbon compared to concrete without SCMs. So it is important to highlight this is a CM replacement. So most of the suppliers, they provide concrete with fly ash, as I mentioned earlier, means they are binary mixes with cement and fly ash. So the cement replacement with fly ash is up to 30%. And the reason that they use fly ash mostly in Hunter region is we have a lot of coal-fired power plants in New South Wales, and fly ash is a byproduct of these coal-fired power plants. So it's easier for them to get fly ash and use that in their concrete mixes. But in Hunter region, we do have some suppliers. They are mostly larger suppliers with both fly ash and slag in them. Means that they have tertiary mixes with cement, fly ash, and slag. And we can normally replace a higher percentage of slag, and this replacement percentage goes up to 65%. So this is just to give an idea about the number of plants that you can have in each council with only fly ash and also with both fly ash and slag. Again, this is the minimum number of plants that we found in each council, and there could be more plants. So in these numbers, we have included plants within the council and also within a 30 minutes drive from the council boundary. And here we have not listed supply names. So if you want to know about your area, your supply capabilities and supplier names, please do reach out to us and we will be able to provide that information to you. Yep. So moving on, we have our suppliers whether they have a minimum volume that they prefer to supply low carbon concrete. Most of the responses we got were that it depends on the project and the project location. But some suppliers said that they need a minimum load volume of 0.4 cubic meters. Then we ask about the cost of low carbon concrete compared to traditional concrete, because often this is also mentioned as a barrier in using low carbon concrete. So again, most of the responses were that it depends on the targeted carbon reduction and also the selection of concrete performances you need. Because this cost premium is mainly associated with additives that we need to add to get a higher early age strength comparable to traditional concrete. So as a general rule, based on our experience working in this space across the country, up to 30% of SCM replacement, it will be cost neutral. But if you replace more than 50% of SCM without having the comparable early age strength to traditional concrete, the cost increase will be up to 5%. And if you have high SCMs with the same early age strength compared to traditional concrete, your cost increase will be 10 to 20%. And then we ask their preference on early engagement to provide low carbon concrete. So for a lot of suppliers, they default have fly ash in their mixes. So they don't need a early age engagement. But as councils, you need to be aware of whether your supply is already replacing cement with fly ash or not. So for councils, you need early age engagement. And for the mixes that you want to get with increased amount of SCMs by adding slag into them, the early age engagement will be based on project specification, requirements, and targeted carbon reduction. So what we have got to know working in this space is that normally early engagement with suppliers is encouraged and preferred as early as the project allows, because this will help councils to optimize the carbon reduction and it will be cost efficient. Then lastly, we have asked all the suppliers whether they have done a carbon assessment for their mixes. So what we got to know was that all the larger suppliers, they have EPDs available for their mixes. EPDs refers to Environmental Product Declaration, which is a third-party verified document to calculate embodied carbon of a concrete mix. So it is a really accurate way to get to know about the carbon reduction of your mix. So, but for the smaller suppliers, they don't have EPDs for their concrete mixes yet. But if you want to get EPDs for your mixes, there are funding available through CCAA, Cement, Concrete and Aggregates Australia, which will help you to reduce the cost of getting an EPD. And here we have linked the link to the funding scheme in this slide, and we will circulate this slide deck after the meeting so that you can have a look.
I'll just add there, sorry, it's not funding, but they've created a program to enable suppliers to develop EPDs quicker. Basically, creating an EPD is a very long process. You have to collect data over a year, and a lot of data about everything to do with your processing, and so it's utilizing the GCCEEW global tool to support you to develop. I think Jason was going to add that in there. Yeah. Yes, thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Asia. Thanks, Lauren. Yep. So this slide talks to the suggested supply engagement questions. As councils, you can ask from the concrete suppliers. So I won't go into details. As general, if you ask these questions, you will have a better understanding of what the suppliers can provide. Also, these questions also you can refer to them later. Yep. So that's the section on supply capabilities. Thank you.
Much.
Yeah, perfect. You're going to go for it, Susan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren and Sachi. We're going to be moving into our first breakout session. So Lauren will explain what we're going to do, and then she will work with the people online, and we will work with people in the room. Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll see how this goes. I don't think I've ever been to this kind of event where we've actually managed to do it online and in person, but we're going to go for it. So in a moment, everyone online will get put into 3 breakout rooms, and everyone in the room, you'll have your tables to talk everything through. The first session, so we've got 2 breakout sessions. The first one today is the purpose is to focus on what are the challenges and the barriers that you have faced in implementing low carbon concrete on your projects. And we really want to focus on where you actually if you've been able to overcome those, what you've done. So if there are any lessons learnt and what you've been able to achieve on your projects. This is, to get give Hunter JO and DQ a good idea of what we are, the issues we are facing at the moment. And then in the next session, we will be looking, so that's more looking past. In the next session, we'll be looking more at the future of, in an ideal world, what would we want to enable us to do certain things. So Sarah is going to move us all into breakout rooms. For the people online, we've dropped a Miro link in. If you want to do the Miro, you can also just talk to us and tell things. For in the rooms, you've got post-it notes. I'll leave you guys to that. Sarah, if you can move everyone.
Awesome. Should we start in the room?
Yes,
Do you
please
think?
do. Yeah.
Okay.
So what we need from everyone is, we don't have much time, as you're all aware. Concise, one thing, one big takeaway from your table.
Okay. Shall we start with the no sticker table? Would that be okay?
It will be. Is that on? Everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
Great. So we had a lot of healthy discussion at the table. One of the big takeaways, we had a big discussion on the LOI and a potential look at why it's specified as hard as it is by Transport for New South Wales. There might be some restrictions in the availability, and it might be causing a lot of waste either underneath the specified target or above it, depending on the availability of what can be pulled out and used.
Thank you for that. If we go to blue table.
Are we just going through sheet one first?
Yeah, you're just going to pick
Okay.
your top liner really from the discussion, because we don't really have a
Yeah,
heap of
what,
time
each-
Short
for.
and sweet.
Because there's three sheets, right? So which,
Yeah,
just the top liner from any three?
yeah.
A key takeaway for you.
Key takeaway, yeah.
We'll
All
be
right.
compiling all of this together at the end to show.
Yeah,
everyone
and we
take
will be
away.
sharing this. There'll be a report that we will share after the event.
Probably collaborative approach to working on coming up with low carbon concrete solutions within the Hunter region.
Yeah,
So starting off with everybody being involved,
yeah,
universities, asset owners, suppliers, consultants.
great. Awesome. Thank you. We've got red table, who've got a bigger sticker than everyone else, but you know, that doesn't mean you're special. But we'll go to red table. Angus, have you been nominated?
Yeah, I think probably we talked a lot. It seems to be a lot from our receiving end, with just being too risk adverse and not being flexible enough to work with the technical experts in this field to work with them and understand what opportunities there are. They talked a lot about shrinkage and the limitations in what we often specify, and that actually not being that relevant for what we're trying to deliver as well.
Okay.
And yeah, I think it seemed to be just really working more closely with the tech specialists in these fields.
Yeah, some education around that, maybe. Thank you so much. Is that green table in behind there? I can't. Black table. I'm looking at.
Can you? Yeah. So we found there's a lot of experience on the table. A lot of experience has been gained. A lot of it was collaboratively. But the biggest outcome was there's a big gap in where people are. There are some people who have a lot of experience, and then there are others who are at the very beginning of their journey and are thinking about very basic concepts of embodied carbon and how to measure and how to incorporate this in their projects.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common across the whole circular economy pathway and of doing things, that everyone's at different stages in their journey with no matter what the product. Thank you so much. I'll move on to the green table. Hello, Janine.
Hello, Susan. I guess the biggest takeout for us, or the top level, was the gap in knowledge. Yeah, so what LCC is already being used that we don't know about, the needing to understand performance, use of LCC, so design life, costs, etc., purposes, that sort of, yep.
Yeah, I mean, I am by no means a concrete expert, but when I started to look into this, I was really overwhelmed by the amount of information and the fact that it is just continually evolving as well. So yeah, I can completely understand that point. And I think we've got Pink at the back.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion about how these fly ash and slag have already been incorporated, not necessarily through the lens of decarbonisation, but just because it's been a more sort of economically viable route. But I guess now it's just about sort of pushing that envelope further and potentially compromising cost or some workability factors to make it from, potentially 30% replacement to over and beyond. And yeah, we were definitely looking with David from Wholesome. They have their eco pack that's been used a lot in a lot of different projects. And yeah, just sort of getting over those barriers of human nature, whether it's, dealing with workability, working with curved surfaces. And you may not necessarily be getting a lot of experience with these materials yet because they're not being incorporated so much. So yeah, it'll definitely take some time there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much from everyone in the room. Perfect timing. We've used half the time and now we can go over to the online groups for them to feedback on their sort of top liners as well. Thanks,
Yep.
Lauren.
So in breakout session number 1, the main things that we sort of spoke about was you might want to try and adopt low carbon concrete, and you might specify it or put it forward in your policy and plans, but sometimes there's difficulties actually achieving that in the field. So the suppliers may not have it available or might not have it available in the quantities or timing that you need. So the way around that was identified, early engagement with contractors, early engagement with suppliers, and just having that line of communication open was identified as a key approach in being able to achieve that. The other comment that was raised was that it's more difficult for smaller suppliers to potentially get EPDs up and running, and that was identified as a bit of a challenge. So.
Over to you, Sachi.
Yep. So in online room 2, we had a good discussion. We had Entire Concrete with us, and they have already used low carbon concrete for a house lab and a driveway. But then the main thing we discussed was like after some refinement, they were able to get low carbon concrete to behave as traditional concrete. But then when you specify it as low carbon concrete, there's a resistance from the industry. They don't want to use a new mix to their product. So what basically we discussed was like having a policy mandate will help to use low carbon concrete more in the industry.
And finally, from online room 3, we were very lucky to have David Kelly from Transport for New South Wales to bring a perspective of what they're doing. And so I think key takeaways for us are Transport for New South Wales are very aware that EPDs are a bit of a barrier to getting data on carbon, and so they've been working on this on their database, the Coston Carbon Library. There was discussion that I'm just going to pull up the discussion that this is for your average person who isn't a concrete specialist. This is hard to understand what are the mixes. Yes, we've got carbon reported, but we don't know really what's fully going on here, and so there is a lot of work to move to more simplified spreadsheets that councils will be able to use to enable them to understand what actually is the baseline, and are we choosing a mix that is lower than that baseline. So yeah, trying to move to open data that enables us to make more informed decisions. I think is probably the main takeaway. And also just Holcim were talking about, the big myths that around people thinking that the concrete doesn't perform the same, or that the cost just is completely out of budget, and that the experiences that contractors might have had 5, 10, 15 years ago just aren't what you would experience now. We had the side of council saying we want it and suppliers saying we can have it, but council saying no contractor is coming to them with, we can do this, we think it's something we can bring to you. So trying to target contractors in the middle and educate them that it's something they can do. And we will go back to the session, I think. That is everyone. I think we've got loads out of that in general, which we will be compiling all together. I believe we're now moving on. Let me just share my screen again. I won't share my screen because we're moving on to Monique.
Yeah.
I'll share my screen then. You guys can see that?
Yes,
Cool.
you can see that.
So hello, I'm Monique Gay, and my role at Landcom is twofold. One, to drive environmentally sustainable outcomes in our communities, and then two, to lead the research pieces that sort of help us solve some of those wicked problems the industry faces. Landcom's a state-owned corporation and the New South Wales Government's housing developer, so we act commercially, delivering a profit back to Treasury, so cost is a big thing for us. But we also have New South Wales Government priorities, including delivering affordable housing and build-to-rent in climate-affected regional areas, and delivering environmentally sustainable development. Let me just... Also, it's freezing. So I'll cover off two things today. One, an overview of the process that we've taken to work with councils and our contractors to adopt low carbon concrete in our civil works. And then two, to share a few quick case studies of where we've achieved this. I'll touch on our key drivers first in terms of adopting low carbon concrete. So our Sustainable Places strategy was adopted in 2017, and we're now well on our way in delivering that as we look towards our 2028 leadership goals. And one of those goals, which was quite bold at the time, it was to enable carbon neutral, water positive, zero waste, and net positive ecological outcomes by 2028. Over the past 12 months, we've sort of taken that next step and pivoted towards our transition to net zero. While we don't know how to fully decarbonise the built environment at the moment, it's a bit of a beast. We do know that we need to adopt all of those low carbon materials and technologies that are available to us today in order to get there in time. So why civil in particular? So we've estimated that our construction activities are responsible for around 75 to 90% of our scope 3 emissions. So while our corporate operational emissions sit at around 1,000 tonnes of carbon per year, that's roughly the same as the emissions as providing civil infrastructure for just 200 homes in one of our communities. And we know that concrete's responsible for around 7% of global carbon emissions, but it's also responsible for around 8% of the emissions embodied in our civil works. It's also responsible for a massive portion of the carbon embodied in our homes that we're building too. So modelling to date showing we can get around 9% reduction in upfront carbon by using low carbon concrete. So it's a massive reduction with, that low hanging fruit, the sort of carbon wins that we need to get to net zero. So far we've received approvals for widespread use of low carbon concrete in the infrastructure for a few of our projects. I'll focus on two today. So one, MacArthur Gardens North in Campbelltown City Council has used low carbon concrete for all the curbs and gutter. And North Wilton has used low carbon concrete for all the curbs, gutter, driveways and footpaths. So now looking at using low carbon concrete for all the precast stormwater pits and pipes too, and have had those discussions sort of early on with suppliers. So for our Panorama at North Wilton project, that was our pilot for our sustainability inclusions in our civil works contract, requiring the use of low carbon concrete, solar powered site sheds, recycled asphalt, and sustainably sourced steel and timber. So we use this project as a sort of test case for our new contract inclusions and to test the market and see where it was at. And our approach to doing that was separating into these two categories. So one, the mandatory inclusions, and that's what we knew that the market could deliver without limiting contractors submitting for the job. So that was pretty key to get the buy-in from our project team, because they were worried that we'd scare off half the contractors and limit their choices. And then that comparative inclusions, that's where we wanted to push the market to deliver. And so those were the exciting ones that we used to compare tender responses. And in the detail of that, that was really us requiring them to provide a provisional amount for the use of these more innovative materials. Cool. So 3 key factors that made it a smooth sort of project for us were that the project team were keen to embed sustainability into the kickoff meeting with council before construction had started, and then throughout the weekly construction meetings on site. So it meant we were all on the same page from day one, and that the contractors knew that meeting those sustainability requirements was a priority, and also provided a space for me to be able to offer support to that contractor when needed, when they were getting a little bit confused or worried. So council were also at the table from day one and agreed to trial those new materials with us to achieve our shared emissions reduction goals. So I think it really helps if you have the council engineer, asset maintenance person, and then a sustainability representative involved in those discussions from day one, because it really helps sort of understand what the key internal drivers are going to be for council, and how the perceived risks might be managed through internal processes and approvals. And thirdly, from day one, it was really taking a partnership approach. So when the contractors did have pushback, offering to reach out to those suppliers ourselves and gather that information, or to work with, council to sort of smooth that over. So we'd never done anything like this before, and we were really feeling around in the dark. But we were firm on taking that, perceived risk and learning from our mistakes if there were any. And so we made sure to flag in our procurement documents that were going out to market that this was just the beginning and that we'd be ramping up our sustainability requirements in the future. So I've listed some of the mandatory inclusions up here, but we'll just focus on low carbon concrete today. And so as a government organisation, we have the same sort of strict protocols around how we procure services and spend public money. So we can't just go out and say, buy this very specific low carbon concrete product. So we assigned some of our choice to price, but a good part of our decision is based on that non-price criteria, including sustainability. And so the comparative inclusions are what allowed us to rank the submissions based on sustainability and their ability to deliver on stuff like low carbon concrete. The tenderers also knew that because that was embedded in the tender documentation. So the tenderers were also required to submit either an EPD or something equivalent to demonstrate that reduction in embodied carbon of the product that they sourced. And so when it came down to it, obviously the people that pull together that tender submission, they've understood what the task is, but then on the ground, the site manager and the contractors, we'd also bring them on the journey. And so Dave, the site manager, he's an absolute character and became my favourite on the site. He pulled me aside after one of the meetings and was quite worried and a little bit mad, I think. And he was like, what's all this low carbon concrete stuff about? What's wrong with normal concrete? So I explained the environmental impacts of standard concrete. And while it's an incredibly useful material, we do need to rapidly ramp up our use of low carbon alternatives, and explain that really there's not a massive difference between the two. As someone who really doesn't know much about concrete, did my best. And then, so the contractor proposed to use a low carbon concrete product from Concrete that had a 20% reduction in embodied concrete. They proposed to use it in all the paths, curbs and driveways. So we had the contractor on board. We were on board to spend the extra money if that was necessary. And so council was sort of that final barrier for us. But since we'd agreed early on with council to trial the use of low carbon materials, we just provided the supplier lab test results and the performance, the EPD for evidence of sustainability, and council were happy to allow it, which was awesome. So knowing that it performed the same as a standard concrete, it wasn't presenting a risk to their assets and maintenance teams. So we expected some hiccups from our contractors, as we'd never worked with low carbon concrete before, and we'd heard that the workability would be a little bit different. But Dave pulled me aside a few weeks after they'd started pouring low carbon concrete to comment excitedly on how easy it was to work with and how they couldn't actually tell the difference between the low carbon concrete and the standard concrete that they use. Which thankfully, goes against that sort of narrative that we do hear sometimes. So for our MacArthur Gardens North project, approvals with Campbelltown were a little bit trickier. So Landcom's working with TRN Group to construct all of the enabling infrastructure for our MacArthur Gardens North development. And then Campbelltown City Council is the approval authority for the infrastructure works and will be the proud owner of that sustainable infrastructure asset once construction is complete, including the maintenance and ongoing monitoring of that asset performance. And so while historically Campbelltown Council have been conservative with their adoption of recycled materials and low carbon materials, we knew that we share net zero goals with council, like our scope 3 emissions are ultimately becoming their assets. And that there had to be someone in council who was trying to get initiatives like this off the ground too. So the main success of this project was that we connected with the Sustainability and Resilience Manager at council to kickstart that conversation internally. And together we set up an initial conversation with council's engineering and assets and maintenance teams. And that was really crucial as council's sustainability manager drove a lot of that internal change that was required to enable approvals for pilots like this. So we started the conversation early on, and I think I read a specific question about that. It was around 2 to 3 months before we needed to place the concrete order, just to give us enough time for that back and forth between council's engineers and the material suppliers, chasing up that performance information to give the engineers confidence. And sort of commenting on the previous discussion as well, we've seen it through a few of our civil projects at the moment that even if you can't lock in that low carbon concrete product at the very start when you sign that contract with your contractor, they haven't placed that concrete order yet. So there's still opportunities along the way to educate them, to bring them on that journey and to source alternative products throughout that construction process, so long as that happens, before they end up needing to place the order, because obviously you don't want to have any kind of project delays. So yeah, I'd love to take all the credit for the success on the MacArthur Gardens North project. That biggest driver was really knowing the council sustainability manager was equally invested in using low carbon concrete. So when it felt like we couldn't come to an agreement, council's general manager ended up getting involved to help strike that balance between minimizing risk and then driving the necessary change to reach council's sustainability targets. So in the end, the data showed that the low carbon concrete products available to us had improved performance and durability, all while delivering that reduction in embodied carbon. And that really did get it over the line. I know I've been racing through really quick, so sorry. But the three main sort of, I think, lessons learnt from the process for us is one, treat it as a learning experience for everyone. Those early conversations with the civil engineers and with council were really key for us. But so are those regular meetings on site. And don't be afraid to call up suppliers and ask the dumb questions because they're often not dumb and they'll get you over the line. Transparency was also important for us during the procurement process. So explaining why we included each sustainability initiative and how we plan to upscale each initiative over time sent that market signal to our suppliers that this wasn't a one-off and that they had to create that organizational change to get there. And then third, just perfection is the enemy of action, really. So the final lesson was to just get on with it, even if we didn't have all the answers up front. So creating an environment where the contractors feel comfortable to ask questions and innovate. In the end, it actually meant that we had built this relationship with our contractors where they now come to us with suggestions on how to reduce carbon or to replace materials with sustainable materials. So not only makes it easier to get those approvals, but also just takes a bit of the load off the sustainability guys too. And that's all from me today.
That is fantastic. We all need a Monique and a Dave on our projects, I think. If you're not sold on using low carbon concrete after that, then I don't know what will make you want to do it. So we were going to try and have time for Monique. We'll see if we do have time at the end, but we just want to get through this next part because, we've got half an hour left. So we're going to go into one more breakout session. Sorry, last time I didn't tell us how much time we've got. We're going to give you 12 minutes for this one. The purpose of this session is we really want to understand for your role, so as a sustainability lead or a delivery manager or engineer procurement, supplier, contractor, whoever it might be, what do you need to enable low carbon concrete to happen? And that might be stuff that's really out there. We want to hear it all, like ideal world, or I just need someone to give me a fact sheet on this. And so I've given a couple of examples here, but these are only examples. They are not gospel. So yeah, I think, Sarah, if you can please move us back into the breakout rooms. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We're going
Perhaps
to go back to our online partners and listen to, is it Lauren's group first?
Maybe Phil or Sachi's group.
Phil?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll start. So our group, we spoke about a few different types of issues, but one of the main limitations that we saw was we might specify in the policy requirements or overall requirements that low carbon concrete be adopted. But when it comes to actually delivering it on the project, there's often roadblocks and reasons why things don't happen. And, the contractor may have a supply restriction, or there may be some sort of issue as to why it can't be delivered. So one of the things that we talked about is appointing a champion within council to oversee the implementation of low carbon concrete on projects, and to workshop any roadblocks or any issues with the design team, or with the construction team, or with the guys on site, to help work through those issues to achieve low carbon concrete outcomes.
Archie?
Sorry, I was on mute. So the main thing discussed was like lack of demand. So normally, like, to provide low carbon concrete suppliers have to do infrastructure change in their concrete plant, and it associated with cost. But then without having a demand for this low carbon concrete, it's hard to drive the change. So the example solution was like, we need to do policy changes to drive low carbon concrete, and also lack of awareness was pointed out. So, and then not specifying them in the council specifications was also one of the barriers.
And then Amapar one, yeah, it was, I think in one word, we want simplicity. We need information that is easy to find and that is clear, and yeah, I think that's probably. I just say something else to do with it. They were asking about where's best to find information, and so I just wanted to do a plug for the work we did do that Alberto showed earlier. It's available on MECLA. There are specifications that have been written, there are clauses you guys can use, and there are lots of fact sheets around frequently asked questions, and yeah, very like, well, and we're making more stuff for councils. I'm going to pass back to the room.
Thank you, everyone online. And just another note to say that all the resources that we're talking about today, we will send those through in the links when we feed back on today's event, as well as all the work you've done, because we've only discussed the top liners. We're going to obviously pull all this information together into reports, so we will share that as well. So we're going to go over to the inside now. So I think I'll start in reverse order with the pink table. I think they were last time. So if we go first to the pink.
So we spoke a lot around the availability of fly ash, particularly from the supply side, and some of the specifications associated with the fly ash. While there is a fair bit of fly ash in the region, only a certain percentage of that is up to specification for incorporation in low carbon concrete. So I think there's an opportunity around that, and considering how the specifications can be updated or modified to expand the type of fly ash that can be incorporated. So that was some really interesting insights from our table.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. And I think, was it the green team?
Okay, the first main driver for local government is to have your council, like the councillors on site, where they've set a target that's given over to the executive team to deliver upon. Without that, you're never going to get the resources that you need to be able to put anything in place. So that's a key important element, first of all. Then we need to go through the process of getting our own customised specifications for your local government area, whereby your suppliers can actually deliver upon that. And then the next step is then to go out to your developers and educate them. And if at the same time you can then get your building side of things going, because all your builders, they do your driveways and a lot of your path work. If you can get them on side, they're generally the subbies who do a lot of the work in place. So you need to get them up to speed and understand and comfortable with what's going on. And it's then reinforced with the suppliers being able to reinforce going, okay, what are you using this product for? This is appropriate or not appropriate. So we don't want people using the wrong type of concrete and it failing early. And then people basically go, oh, I'm not going to use that again, and walk away from it when they probably haven't picked the right type. So there's levels of education that need to be put in place to support the success. And we need all the parties to work together to be able to deliver upon that.
Yeah, I think that'd be really, really great to achieve some education piece around all of that, Stuart. Thank you. I can't remember who was next. Was it Black? Black table?
Yeah, I think you could summarize ours somewhat similar to that, where we have really just a transmission of knowledge throughout the value chain. I think was really a common trend, and engaging all the stakeholders as early as possible for alignment on that. And I think some good feedback as well around, not all concrete applications are alike, and understanding upfront for local councils, understanding what the risks associated with different types of concrete works, applications, the benefits and the costs, and getting into the detail there, and not, getting past that sort of broad strokes approach, really, where can we develop some additional benefit and understand, what the other risks are.
Great. Great feedback, everyone. I think we'll go to, what is this colour table? Blue table.
Pretty good discussion too. I think we came up with sort of three main factors too. Again, the first two have been talked about, but I think they just need to be repeated, which is specifications and working together. I think that's fundamental. And engagement and education and upskilling, I think is, again, it's been mentioned by a few tables, but it just needs to be keep mentioning because we have that massive gap. So we really need to breach that. And also to the transparency between wanting sustainability and procurement. Also being more driven by the cost of a project rather than sort of understanding the whole sustainability piece as well.
Yeah, the whole picture. Thank you. No sticker table?
I'll just add to that interesting piece of, one of the suppliers said, we never get from contractors what's the ESD requirements for the project. If they can be shared on, that really helps them to know what you're actually trying to meet.
Thanks, Lauren.
So very similar takeaways to the group. Again, just want to touch on the two main ones were early engagement. So, project timelines, how the concrete performs so that we get an early understanding on realistic timeframes. Specifications, so working together on how those can be adopted. And then also some takeaways were around risk management. So how we can start building confidence in our asset teams to start adopting this and rolling it out in low risk areas.
Yeah, I think Alberto, your project's been trying to address that kind of thing. And I know they've been working with your council, so that's we've made a start there. And then last but not least, our red team.
Yeah, similar to all the other tables, a lot around specifications, but another part that we talked about, just to not repeat everyone else, existing baselines. So actually understanding what we're asking for. Talking to a lot of the suppliers, it seems that we already use fly ash in a lot of the concrete that we already procure across the hunter. So without understanding the baseline, what are we actually asking for? And is it, what's the stretch goal? What are the specific applications for what we're asking for in a reduction?
Right, okay.
If the standard is already technically low carbon.
Yeah, okay. I think that's awesome. I just want to make a personal thank you to everyone in the room today. I've really valued all your time and contributions, and I know I've spoken to quite a few of you outside of this room as well today, and I really value the time you've spent today, and what I hope to continue to spend some time continuing this conversation. So I'm going to pass quickly to
Say one thing and then
Lauren
you
to
can close
wrap
up.
up, and then I will
So,
do my bit.
yeah. So we just wanted to give an overview of where we see the industry going from councils, more industry and research perspective. So from councils, obviously, there's a lot we are looking to do, but I think some key things are yourselves picking up more and understanding EPDs and utilising them and starting to understand your Scope 3 emissions, the increasing use of higher levels of cement replacement in your mixes, and also, we haven't touched on it today as much, but we're aware of many councils starting to look more at other recycled materials, so your concrete aggregates. Generally, where the industry is moving is around changes in specifications from being very prescriptive to more performance-based. In the future, we can expect to start to see carbon pricing coming in, as we're seeing in Europe. And then just finally, fly ash and blast furnace slag is not everything. We will start to run out of it in the future as we close certain industries, and so there is a huge amount of work by academia and by the suppliers and many stakeholders across the industry to look into alternative materials. You've got people in the room today who are doing a lot of work into pond ash and bottom ash, particularly in the Hunter region. You'll also hear things around calcined clay, lithium slag over in WA, not relevant here, and then things around carbon capture and storage. I will hand over to Susan and Alberto to give the final comments.
Yeah, I sort of got ahead of myself then, but it was just to say I really hope that this is the beginning of a continuing conversation, and some of the ways we can do that is, Alberto mentioned earlier, MECLA. They have a number of working groups which focus on a local government perspective, supplier perspective, concrete specialists, and yeah, we'd love people to join the conversation there. We will send some links. We'll also send the specifications that Alberto's team did with Arup, and then keep in touch. We've got our emails there, so any questions. Also, we didn't get much time to speak with Gay, Monique Gay from Landcom, so if you'd like to obviously send some questions to her as well. And I would like to invite everyone to sort of form a network so that we can keep meeting together, perhaps not in a forum like this, maybe a bit more online, looking at things like training, looking at things like education, looking at things like specifications, whatever direction we want to take or focus on. I'd really like to build a network starting from today. So I will send an invitation to, if you're interested in that, when we get in touch after. And then lastly, to stay, we're going to have a lovely lunch outside. Please stay, chat, connect, keep in touch. There's a lot of amazing brains in this room, a lot of expertise. So yeah, please get to know each other and keep in touch. Thank you so much.